Good morning and welcome back to our Ask the Agronomist Facebook Live. Today we are here in the bright sunny studio.
Yeah.
It is a gorgeous day outside.
Yes, it is. It's getting better by the day. I see the number 8 in the forecast next week, so.
Now that's exciting.
Yeah. Spring to summer.
It is. It is. That's all right. It's fine with me as long as there's no snow on the ground. We'll be doing well. All right. Today we're going to be talking about planting depth, planting conditions, and things to be cautious about since it is a little wet out there still.
Yeah. That's the one thing we're running into now. It's warming up fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm.
As you can see, we looked a couple weeks ago. We looked at the soil temp.
Yeah.
And then for those in Iowa, we have Iowa State does a great job at measuring the 4-inch soil temp. I've been trying to monitor it the last few days myself, but it's just interesting to see when we pulled that up a couple of weeks ago, where we were sitting with snow on the ground pretty much.
Pretty chilly. I don't know if you can see it. It's the 32 down to 39, really.
Yeah.
All in the 30s.
We're in the 30s. We're blue, but if you go to the next slide, we're warming up. That was yesterday. I think earlier in the week I think the first day I measured 41, and then the next day it was up to 46 at 4 inches. So warming up fast. We were in the 60s around here and going up here this weekend with wind. So all those things are a good sign and keeping guys in high spirits, although we're all going at once now. Yeah. Which is the scary thing, and also be careful to everybody out there, everybody on the roads as well. So.
Okay, it's kind of crazy how much it can change.
Yeah, but just 2 short weeks. Things are looking up.
Gotta love Iowa.
2 weeks ago we were doom and gloom.
Yep. All right. So let's just get a little bit jump right into depth.
So the seeding depth thing, when it comes to planting, I think is extremely important. I think I've been asked this every year, multiple times, on both corn and beans, for different reasons. Number one, seeding depth has a lot to do with, the planter, the soil types that's out there, all those different conditions we just talked about, temperature as well. But when it comes to seeding depth, it's really crucial for those corn and beans to get out of the ground evenly. That's what you want.
Right.
And on time. So threw soybeans in there first. Soybeans is kind of my what I did my master's on, something I really enjoy talking about. But we'll get to corn, so don't worry. But the soybean thing, I would say in general, soybeans are a little more sensitive to the depth issue. And that's why I say make sure that you're putting soybeans into the moisture. Don't put them on the line. Don't if you've got a coarse soil type or something, and that line of moisture is going down, that's when a lot of people will ask, how deep can I plant soybeans? In general, I would say 2 inches. Once you get beyond 2 inches deep, they're really going to struggle to emerge simultaneously or evenly, uniformly. And you can see that kind of in this picture. It may be hard to see, but basically what they're showing there is about an inch difference in planting depth. And you can see that soil line. So these were around an inch or a little more. You see as it starts to brighten up in color there. But these were around 3/4 of an inch deeper. And how they are just starting to break through the soil surface right there. They're not even green on top yet. And these were already up, already starting to expand and get their first trifoliates poking out there. So well ahead of the ones that were planted depth. Deeper. I see this all the time. You go out there and you look, it may be a crusting issue, it may be something else too. But planting depth and unevenness of the planter unit causes a lot of uneven emergence issues. And soybeans, they're pulling a lot of weight up through that soil to get it up out of the ground versus corn where it just has to poke its first leaf out. So, and the other thing with soybeans is the moisture requirement. Moisture, they require about 50% uptake of water and, they have to take up about 50% of their weight in water to germinate and start that process. So if you don't put them in the soil, the moisture line, they may have moisture, start germinating, and then that moisture line may move down. And then it sits there. And it sits there until you get a rain or until that moisture line comes back up and meets it, and it can imbibe more water. And you don't want that, because that's the more any corn or soybeans sit there in that phase, that transition phase, the more it's open to infection, diseases, other things. It's going to sit there longer, and then it's going to be delayed or uneven emergence.
How much warm weather do we have to have for that to be a watch out?
Well, in terms of the temperatures and stuff, like we just talked about soil temps. If your soil temps are looking pretty good and they're in the 50s, I would encourage you guys to wait. I think we're going to make that in most parts. Guys in the far north, make sure they're hitting that 50 and increasing at that 2-inch depth where you're planting that seed. You don't want it to be going back down. But if you see, cold rain in right in front of you in the forecast, I would hold off. Because that's something that when they're germinating, if they get a cold rain, you're going to have a lot of chilling issues. So, yeah, that temperature thing and the moisture go hand in hand.
Right.
Right now it looks good in a lot of areas. I know it's still a little chilly up north and stuff, but those temperatures are going to be rising, and then they're going to be drying out as well. Right now, I would say our main thing is moisture. Trying to wait out, some of those wet spots in the field. Guys are itching to go, and they're going to plant through them, or and they're going to have issues, as we'll talk about here more in a second.
Okay, so let's switch over to the corn side real quick.
Yeah, sure. So corn is also very important. I guess I'm not trying to understate one or the other, but corn. In terms of corn, one thing I want to point out: a lot of guys tend to, when we get in these kind of situations like the spring we're having, maybe wetter soil conditions or something, they tend to shallow things up. They're like, well, the moisture's there, the heat's there, we'll get it out of the ground faster, and not smear it as much maybe, not cause as many issues. But the problem with shallowing it up is you're pushing where those nodal roots start coming out of. You're pushing that closer to the soil line. And the further you push it to the soil line, that's what dries out in the soil first. That the top inch or two of soil is going to dry out from the heat, the wind, all that stuff dries out pretty quick. So if that first node on that corn plant is really close to the soil surface because you shallowed up that planting depth, then those nodal roots are going to come out. They're going to come out in dry soil, and that's what causes rootless corn. So because if you look at this kind of picture, you see a lot of roots here, but you got to remember that from here down, this pretty much drops off. This connecting tissue here, the mesocotyl, just connects to the main corn plant. So these seedling roots will all die off within a few short weeks after it comes out of the ground. So these are the roots you're most concerned about, and those are the ones that are going to be at the crown, which is typically around that 3/4 inch mark. But if you push that planting depth up, you're pushing that crown closer to the surface and risking having issues with your corn roots coming out and dying off. In the dry soil conditions or air or whatever it hits first.
So how about, let's talk a little bit about the percent of moisture it takes for corn to take off.
Sure.
So soybeans are 50%.
Mentioned soybeans were at 50%. Corn doesn't take near as much. It only takes about 35% of its weight in water to start that germination process. Still the same risk factors for germination and cold. I would say that first 2 days, first 48 hours. If you can get through that point, then it's a transition. It germinates, it's growing, but then it's going to start. It's going to say, okay, I need to put a root out, which is going to come out first, and then I need to put shoots upwards. And they'll find their ways. Once they come out, they'll go the direction they need to. But if it's a cold rain in the middle of that process, you end up damaging a lot of those cells, and that's when you see all that crazy stuff twisting and leaves underground and things like that. So, make sure the temperatures and the moisture is a huge thing. And corn's the same way. If you're on sandy soils, I'd encourage you to go towards the bottom of that 2-inch mark. We're 1.5 to 2 inches on corn. You may just want to sink it down there a little deeper, especially if the moisture's already starting to escape. And the other thing I'd mention too is tillage plays a huge role. If your moisture line's down there at a good spot, you're like, oh yeah, we'll be able to sink that in 1.5 inches, and then you put pre-emergence down or something, or some fertilizer down, and then you till it in. If you're conventional tillage, you're kicking up a lot of that moisture right there during that tillage pass. So that moisture line's not going to be obviously where it was. And go back and check that.
All right. So lastly, let's just talk a little bit about planter options.
So and I think in our area in general every year. Probably one of the main concerns is what we're talking about right now, the depth and the issues we have with moisture and sidewall compaction and that smearing. You know what happens. So if you're smearing that sidewall, those roots are not going to grow down. They're going to try to grow across, and then they may spend a good chunk of the first few weeks of their life trying to get down, and then the moisture leaves.
Right.
And causes a lot of yield loss, because that's when they make up the first month or two of their life is the biggest. That's what determines the yield. You know, in V5 they're already determined how big around that ear is. So, you know, very, very important. So if you're having issues like that, you've had them in the past, you have them this year. If you go out there and see some sidewall compaction, you know, roots doing funky things, trying to go sideways before they go down. There's a lot of options, you know, and I'm not encouraging anybody to plant into not less than ideal soil conditions, but there's a lot of options for tough soil types to plant into on the market right now. And I just threw a couple of them up there. I guess I had a couple of yetters in there. I didn't mean to do that. There's lots of types of closing wheels out there on the market. You can see some of the zipper ones and some of the spike ones, you know, and the chains on the back to make sure that you get good coverage on the seed.
Yep.
A lot of different options. I also threw in one of Precision Planting's new things. They call it the Furrow Jet. You can see it's kind of like a little Y.
Yeah.
And so it goes on the back of essentially on a seed firmer. You know, so it's applying fertilizer on each side of the seed. So it's not on top. So you can it's a better placement for the fertilizer, and it's not on top. So it's not going to potentially cause fertilizer burn, salt damage.
Right.
But the other thing that it does, if you look at it, it actually does break up some of that sidewall compaction because it's in a Y.
Yeah.
Where it's very important for those roots to find a channel to go down. That's kind of breaking up some of that.
Right.
They're kind of doing some studying. It's one of those interesting things, you know, you develop something and you think, okay, our goal here is applying fertilizer in a better form. But inadvertently, they also help with the sidewall compaction issues. So just a lot of things to think about. You know, if you've had issues with this, I would say look at some of those options this year. You know, it's not something you want to worry about right now, but take a look at them and go out and maybe visit somebody that has them on their planner.
Yeah, see how it works. All right, well, perfect. Thank you for the information.
You're welcome.
That will come in handy, I'm sure, to many people all across our territory.
Yep.
Well, thank you for our viewers for tuning in, and have a good week.